The morning I came home from the hospital, the rain had rehearsed its lines. It spoke in a thin sheet against the cedar siding, polite as a metronome. The taxi idled and coughed, and the driver carried in my small bag, setting it by the door like you place a sleeping bird, carefully, hoping not to wake anything that can't fly anymore. "Do you need help, ma'am?" he asked. I shook my head and smiled with the half of my mouth that remembered how. Words had become a cupboard on a high shelf. Some days I could reach them with my fingertips. Some days I couldn't. He tipped his cap and left me to my quiet. The house looked back at me the way old friends do when they aren't sure how to say hello. The coat rack still leaned at an angle. The umbrella with ducks on the handle waited, patient as ever. On the hallway table, the bowl of keys sat like a chorus of small silver fish, just as I'd left them before the stroke. And what a thing that is, to return to exactly what you left behind, now feeling like a guest in rooms you built. I stood there a while, listening. Rain, clock, breath. 3 instruments making a song with no melody. My home had always had a hum to it, kettles and radios, students laughing in the parlor while I corrected posture and softened shoulders at the upright piano. Now it had the hush of a stage before the curtain lifts. If you're listening from a quiet place tonight, tell me where you are. Sometimes I imagine little lights across the map, kitchens, living rooms, hospital rooms, and all our silences waving at each other. I put my hand on the wall. The wood was cool, old boat cool, like it had sailed through a storm and beached itself neatly in the suburbs for me to live inside it. "Hello," I said, the word gentle and crooked. The house did not answer, but the clock ticked in polite agreement. I shuffled to the kitchen. The tea kettle still sat on the back burner, its mouth open like it had a secret. I filled it slowly, the water making a silver river out of the spout, and set it down, flame low. My left hand, the weaker one, trembled a little on the knob. I forgave it. I've learned to forgive what shakes. On the refrigerator door, a small army of magnets held the history of my life, a postcard from Whidbey Island, a music school schedule from years ago, a photograph of my husband in a wool cap, half squinting at the sun. The magnets formed a crooked staff, and the notes, the scraps and reminders dangled like a song that remembers its chorus more than its verses. The kettle began to whisper. I set a cup on the counter and waited for the water to find me. When you cannot say everything, you become a connoisseur of little sounds. The soft V of steam, the polite clink of a spoon, the way porcelain rings when it meets wood. They are syllables in a language the body keeps when the mouth misplaces it. I sat with my tea and tried the door to words again. In my head, everything still clicks and clatters, whole paragraphs marching up like students late for class. But when I invite them out, there's a thin doorway, and not everything fits. It is a strange thing to be fluent in silence. The phone rang once and stopped. A check-in from my daughter, perhaps. She is good at speaking to voicemails, at leaving kindness in small boxes. She worries, as if worry is a duty handed down through the women in our family, the way we hand down recipes and thread. I love her. Sometimes I wish she would sit and let the rain do the talking, that we might listen together to the ways grief conducts weather. If you're still with me, whisper your city in the comments. I like to imagine the rain practicing its vowels above your roof too. I have taught music most of my life. Children, mostly. Adults who wanted to remember their hands. People who needed a way to move their sadness from the middle of their chest to the air beyond it. I used to tell my students there are 3 truths you can trust: the metronome, your breath, and the way light changes the room at 4 in the afternoon. The metronome soothes, the breath corrects, and the light forgives. The stroke took my easy speech, and with it went the small graces I didn't know used words, ordering stamps, telling the pharmacist which pills are the kind that make sleep soft. But the stroke did not touch the part of me that hears. If anything, it grew ears in places I didn't know could listen. My fingers now hear. My shoulders, too. Even my left knee, the one that complains during the weather, learned a patience that feels like a hymn with no words at all. After tea came wandering. I floated through rooms like a slow river, touching the edges of furniture like you touch a railing in a museum. The parlor smelled faintly of lemon oil and old sheet music. The upright piano waited against the bay window, its top a small museum of life, a ceramic heron, a bowl of metronome keys and paper clips, a cracked photograph of my wedding day tucked in the corner of a frame. The piano wore a runner of lace, and dust had embroidered itself across the edges. I stood beside it and placed my palm on the lid. Once, this wood had been a forest. Then it became an instrument. Then my neighbor's. Then mine. My students used to rest their cheek near the fallboard to feel the hum. See, I would say, it sings even when you think you're only pressing. I did not lift the lid. Not yet. There is a kind of reverence in waiting to open the thing that knows your secrets. The afternoon dimmed in that Pacific Northwest way where gray is not absence but a generous balance, letting the world keep its outlines without demanding brilliance. On the mantel, I lit a candle. The flame put a small gold dress on everything. The doorbell rang, and my heart, orderly as a quarter note, changed to eighths. I moved slowly to the door. It was my son, dear, restless, practical. "Mom," he said too brightly, as if happiness is a coat that fits any weather. "How are we today?" I smiled the smile I reserve for people who love me by counting facts. He stepped inside, damp at the shoulders, and placed a grocery bag on the counter. Milk, soup, grapes, a loaf of bread he apologized for because it was not the kind I used to buy. "I'll set it out," he said, already moving things into their places. He talks to my kitchen the way I talk to the rain, as if the right words will teach it to behave. "How's the therapy?" he asked, cautiously, skirting the cliff of words. I held up my left hand and opened and closed it slowly, the hand clenching and releasing like an anemone, learning trust. He nodded, relief performing its small dance. "Good. That's good." He glanced toward the parlor, the piano half visible from where he stood. "Have you tried?" he asked. I shook my head.
Not yet. His face flickered through three expressions: hope, worry, the quick calculation of a man balancing what he wants with what he's afraid to ask for. He talked then, filling the house with updates: his daughter's school play, a new coffee shop near his office, the bridge finally repaired out by the marina. He spoke around my silence with the kindness of someone who would carry a bouquet down a hallway and set it ever so carefully in a room you're not ready to enter. When he left, he hugged me twice. "Call if you need anything," he said, and I held up the small device from my pocket like a talisman. He laughed, kissed my cheek, and stepped back into the rain, which had switched from metronome to soft drum. I stood inside the door a long time after, the imprint of his hands on my shoulders like warm stamps, fading slowly. Children grow up into weather you cannot predict, and then one day they are the roof you stand under. It is not the life I expected, but it is a good one. If you're still here, would you press the like button? Sometimes I need to know there are other roofs, other rooms, other patient clocks. Evening changed the color of the piano. It became darker, more certain of itself. I put on the lamp near the window. The shade made a honey pool on the rug. The lace runner shone like a low tide. I pulled out the bench, the old walnut one that groans politely as if it has complaints but loves me too much to file them. I sat carefully, my knees aligning themselves with their small, loyal aches. The cushion sighed a memory. My right hand lifted like a bird that flies the same route every year, no map required. My left hand waited, curious and suspicious like a cat. I did not open the key cover. My fingers lay on the cool wood. Once I played scales in the morning to make the day dignified. Once I played Chopin when it rained and Gershwin when it didn't. My husband would whistle in the kitchen, deliberately off-key to make me laugh. My students, hair wild from bikes and backpacks, would line up and tell me about algebra tests and apple slices and what the mean girl said. And then we would fix our backs and remember that wrists are birds, not bricks. In the hospital, the physical therapist had put a small elastic band around my fingers and asked me to press and release, until my knuckles learned the old grammar. Now I did that in the quiet. Press and release, as if the piano lid itself were a consonant I was practicing for a language I hadn't spoken in a while. I thought about the first song I ever learned, not the one in a book, the one my mother sang while folding sheets, that soft hymn which carried the smell of starch and June. Sometimes memory is not a picture, sometimes it's a temperature. This one was warm and white and shaped like a square of sun on a wooden floor. The clock chimed the hour and the house agreed to it without fuss. Outside, a car moved slow down the street, tires brushing puddles like fingers finding a chord. Loneliness is an honest instrument. It plays exactly what is there, not what you wish. Tonight it played a low F, steady, unadorned, not so much as sad, as truthful. I sat with it until the room and I were the same note. The phone rang again, and this time I answered. My daughter's voice, bright with the effort of being brave. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How's home?" I told her in the way I can about tea and the clock and the rain, speaking in the shorthand of sound and breath. She understood more than she admitted, and we let the quiet fill what words could not. "Do you want me to come by tomorrow?" she asked. I looked at the piano. My hands answered before my mouth did. I tapped the bench softly twice, a rhythm we used when she was a little girl playing hide and seek. She laughed through the line. Oh, thank God for muscle memory of joy. "I'll be there," she said. "Morning with muffins. We'll pretend are healthy." After we hung up, I stayed on the bench. I ran my finger along the lip of the key cover, feeling the nick where a student once banged a metronome too hard and apologized with cookies. I thought of all the apologies music has accepted on my behalf, all the times the room forgave us because we sang in it. If you're still here, tell me one song that belongs to you. Put it in the comments. I like to see titles run together like a strange choir. Night lay down softly. I turned off the lamp, and for a moment, the window held my reflection, a pale oval, hair pinned back, not quite neatly, eyes bright as small lamps. Behind me, the piano like a ship at harbor. I stood and went to the bedroom, where the quilt waited with its fields of blues. On the dresser, a small music box sat, a ballerina inside pirouetting when you turn the key. I bent forward, wound it once. It creaked into life, tinny, sweet, half-remembered. She turned on her single plastic toe, and I thought, we all dance the best we can on what we are given.
In bed, the muscles of my face unclenched and my jaw forgot to be useful. Sleep came on like a simple chord, nothing fancy, just sound enough to hold me. Sometime before morning, I woke to a feeling I had not felt since before the stroke, my fingers practicing. It's a strange thing. The body rehearses without you. Both hands trembled a little against the sheet, and I thought of keys, ivory, ebony, smooth as lozenges, lined like sentences. I sat up, listened. Rain, quieter now, like the sky had learned to whisper. The house breathed its old ship breath. A gull called out by the water, and then changed its mind and fell silent. I put on my robe and walked through the hall. Even in the dark, my feet knew where the rugs begin and end, where the board near the bookcase likes to complain. In the parlor, the piano was a dark body, steady as a promise. I lifted the lid. Even that small hinge made music. I sat. I set my left hand on the bass, my right on the treble, fingers hovering as if over warm tea. I did not try a song. I tried a note. Middle C, the truest place on a map. I pressed it and let it ring. A single lantern lit in a large field. The tone hung, then thinned, then folded itself neatly away, like someone putting a dress back in tissue paper. I waited. I pressed D, then E. Kind, careful. The old ladder. My left hand answered with a low G, soft as fog. And out of the dark, from a pocket of air somewhere behind my shoulder, memory walked in wearing its old coat. The wedding song. Not the fancy one. The quiet one my husband and I used to play when the guests had gone and the cake had become a story. A melody that sits lower than most, the sort that will not beg you to weep, but allows you, if you want, to stand near the place where weeping could begin. I did not play it. I only let it stand near me, like a friend at the threshold, hat in hand, waiting to be invited. My fingers tingled, first like pins, then like birds remembering their route. Left hand, brave now, right hand, kinder to it. I lowered the lid again, gentle. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Or the day after when the muffins arrive and my daughter sits where the metronome used to rest, pretending not to hope. Back in the kitchen, I wrote one word on the pad by the phone. I wrote it slowly, letters taking the shape of something that had to be learned again from the beginning. Soon. Then I turned the page over and wrote another word, because hope needs a partner. Together. If you're still listening, stay close. Tell me where you're listening from, which ocean, which street, which small lamp on which quiet table. Sometimes when I play again in my head, I imagine your rooms brightening too. I went back to bed with the kind of tired that feels like purpose. Not heavy, but fruitful, like soil. The rain started up again, gracious and exact. The clock kept time like it had pledged itself to me. I put my hands on my chest and let my own pulse count the measures. The house was still, but it no longer felt empty. I could hear something standing up inside the dark. Not words yet. Something older. Something with both hands. And in that soft space before morning, I let a single thought sit on my pillow like a feather that chose me. The music is still here. It has been waiting. So have I. If you're here with me, if the quiet is kind where you are, thank you for listening. I will tell you what happened next, when morning brought muffins and a small, brave song to our table.
When morning came, the rain had thinned to a fine mist. That kind of Washington rain that feels less like weather and more like breath. The light was silver, not gold. The kind of light that doesn't insist on being noticed, just asks you to stay a while. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the edge of my mug with one fingertip, a quiet metronome for thought. My daughter arrived not long after. She didn't knock, just called softly through the screen. "Mom, it's me. I brought blueberry muffins and hope." The sound of her voice filled the house like steam finding a whistle. When she came in, she looked around, smiling like someone stepping into a childhood memory that still remembers her back. She talks more now. Maybe it's because I talk less. Maybe words rush in to fill the space you leave open. She unpacked the muffins, sliced fruit, made a mess of the counter, and all the while she narrated every movement like a radio host describing sunlight. I nodded, smiled, wrote small things on the notepad. Tea? Warm? Rainy outside. My handwriting is slower now, shaky in parts, but the pen knows where it's going, just like my fingers used to know a melody before my mind had to think about it. At one point, she picked up my hand, her thumb brushing the faint bruise where the IV once lived. "Still sore?" she asked. I shook my head. Pain fades when purpose visits. She noticed the piano keys visible through the doorway and smiled softly. "You've been near it again," she said. I nodded. "Did you play?" Her voice was careful, as if she might wake something sleeping. I pointed to the notepad and wrote a single word: soon. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because hope sometimes sounds like laughter. After she left, muffins half gone, hugs half whispered, the house returned to its gentle silence. But it was a warmer silence now, like a cat curling around your ankles. I walked to the parlor and sat on the piano bench. The cushion still sighed as it always did. I rested my hands on my knees and let my body remember what still belonged to it. The therapists say progress is measured in inches, not miles. But I've learned that memory doesn't measure that way. It arrives in chords, unexpected, full-bodied, undeniable. The first time I pressed a key after the stroke, it felt like touching a doorknob to a room I wasn't sure I was allowed to enter. The sound startled me, not because it was loud, but because it was alive. Middle C again, a small, perfect, unassuming miracle. The note lingered in the air longer than I expected, like the house had been waiting for that specific sound to remember what it was built for. I tried another, D, then E, and there it was again, that strange trembling behind my ribs. Not sadness, not joy, just recognition. If you're listening right now, tell me in the comments, is there something your body remembers that your mind forgot? A smell, a song, a place that hums inside you even after years of silence? I like to think those things are the soul's fingerprints. They stay even when the hands that made them forget their shape. Days passed quietly, marked by teacups, therapy appointments, and the low, soft hum of the piano. Each morning, I'd lift the lid a little more. Each afternoon, I'd press a few more notes. My left hand was stubborn, but then again, so am I. There's a beauty in small defiance, in the refusal to end your song before it's finished. I began to notice patterns, the rhythm of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the rain that always arrived at 4 o'clock sharp, as if God kept his own metronome. The house wasn't quiet anymore. It was tuning itself. One evening, as the sky melted into purple, I found an old metronome tucked behind a stack of hymn books. Dust had settled on its brass pendulum, but when I wound it, it ticked faithfully, click, 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 the same heartbeat it kept for decades, of students, of laughter, of wrong notes that were always forgiven.
I set it on the piano, let it count time for me while I practice pressing keys without sound, fingers lifting, landing, lifting again, just rehearsing muscle memory. It's strange how the body stores rhythm even when the mind doesn't remember the song. Some part of us is always still listening. Later that week, during my physical therapy session, the therapist smiled at my progress. "Your hand's strong again," she said. "You're recovering beautifully." I couldn't tell her that my hand wasn't just healing, it was remembering. When I got home, I placed both hands on the keys. I didn't try to play a song. I simply pressed the lower notes and let the vibrations travel up my arms, through my shoulders, into my heart. The sound filled my chest until I could almost feel language growing roots again. If you're still here, maybe press the like button, not for me, but for every small sound that once saved you when the world went quiet. That night, I dreamed of my mother again. She was hanging laundry in sunlight, humming the hymn she used to hum when I was small. I tried to hum with her, but my dream mouth couldn't find the melody. So I tapped my fingers instead. And she looked over, smiled, and said, "It's all right, Ruth. The hands remember before the words do." When I woke, I was crying, but softly. Not the kind of crying that breaks you open, the kind that waters something small you didn't know was growing. The morning light was gentle, almost transparent. The piano keys shone like teeth in a half smile. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the house was breathing with me again. If you're still listening, stay close. I'll tell you what happened the day my family came to visit, and how the song that returned in my hands brought every name, every memory, and every bit of love back to life again.
It was a Saturday, one of those pale Washington mornings that smelled like damp cedar and new beginnings. The kind of morning that doesn't shout hope, but whispers, "It's safe now." I woke early, not because of pain, but because the house itself seemed to be holding its breath. The air was soft, expectant. Even the clock's ticking sounded gentler, as if it knew something I didn't. I moved through the kitchen in slow rhythm, water boiling, kettle sighing, birds rearranging the silence outside. The piano waited in the next room, closed but alive, like a heart between beats. My daughter had called the night before. She said, "We're all coming tomorrow, Mom. Me, Mark, and little Lily. We'll bring lunch. No excuses. We miss you." I wrote back, "Okay, bring sunshine if you can." And she replied, "I'll try, but this is Washington, remember?" Her laughter still echoes when I think of it. Warm, round, the kind that sits in the corners of a room long after the person leaves. When the knock came, I already had the teapot ready. 3 mugs, mismatched but perfect, one for each of them. The door opened on laughter, the kind that doesn't ask permission to enter. My daughter swept in with her coat half off, my son carrying a paper bag of sandwiches, and my granddaughter Lily clutching a bright yellow tulip. "For you, Grandma," she said. Her voice was the sound of small bells. I bent a little, slowly, carefully, and she tucked the tulip into my cardigan pocket. "There," she said. "Now you're spring." Lunch was noise, beautiful noise. Forks against plates, the rustle of napkins, Lily's chatter about her piano lessons, and my children filling in the quiet like a choir tuning up. They talked about work, about traffic, about how fast Lily was growing. Every so often, They'd pause, look at me, smile too quickly, and continue talking. They still loved me in the way people love someone they're afraid to break, gently, but from a small distance. And I love them in the way people love those who have forgotten a part of them, without blame, just waiting for the right key to turn. After lunch, Lily wandered toward the piano. Her small fingers grazed the keys, producing clumsy, perfect sounds, notes too shy to stand alone but too curious to stay silent. "What's this one?" she asked, pressing a high C. I smiled. She grinned. "Sounds like a raindrop." Her mother said, "That piano's been there since before I was born. Grandma used to teach half the neighborhood on it." Lily turned to me. "Can you play, Grandma?" The room went very still. My daughter froze mid-motion. My son stopped fiddling with his watch. For a moment, even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to answer, to say, "Once upon a time," to say, "My fingers remember more than my tongue does." But instead, I simply stood. The bench creaked softly as I sat down. My daughter whispered, "Mom, are you sure?" I nodded. Then I lifted the lid.
The keys stared up at me, ivory and patient. My reflection shimmered faintly in their surface, a ghost made of light and memory. I placed my right hand down first, a chord of habit, then the left, a chord of courage. And just like that, silence turns into sound. I began with the old warm-up. C major scale, slow, deliberate, uneven. The first notes wobbled, like a newborn deer on trembling legs. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth. Mark blinked hard, pretending he was just watching, but Lily smiled as if she already knew the ending. My fingers stumbled through a few phrases, then muscle memory stepped in, that loyal old friend that never asks questions. The melody arrived, fragile, familiar, true. It was our song, the one from my wedding, the one my husband used to hum when the house smelt like cinnamon in late afternoons. When I pressed the first chord, I could see him again, standing in the kitchen doorway, towel over his shoulder, pretending not to cry. The notes came faster now, not perfect, but whole. They filled the house, climbed the stairs, and opened every door that had been closed since the stroke. Lily gasped softly, her eyes wide, small hands clasped together like she was watching magic. "Grandma," she whispered, "you remember." My daughter's tears came then, not the kind that break you, but the kind that mend you, stitching one quiet heart to another. She knelt beside the piano, her head resting against my arm. She said, "I missed this." My son stood behind us, silent, hands in pockets, and after a long moment, he whispered, "Dad would have loved this." I kept playing. Every note was a word I hadn't said in months. Every chord was a memory that refused to die. I didn't need sentences. The music spoke for me, the only language that had never left. If you've ever had a moment where something broken began to sing again, hit the like button. That's what this was. Not performance, not healing, just remembering. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of love, of awe, of relief. My daughter exhaled. My son smiled without hiding it this time, and Lily climbed into my lap, her small fingers pressing the same middle C I had touched the night before. She whispered, Can you teach me?" I nodded, and in that nod, there was every word I couldn't say. Yes, I'm still here. Yes, the music still lives in me. Yes, it's yours too. The rest of the afternoon passed like sunlight through lace. Soft, fragile, infinite. We made cocoa. We laughed about old stories. And at one point, my daughter said, "You know, Mom, I think the piano remembered you before we did." I smiled, because she was right. Some loves have their own memory. They just wait for you to catch up. If you're still here, stay close. I'll tell you what happened when the neighbors heard the music again, and how one quiet recital turned into something that gave my silence a stage. The music didn't end that day. It only changed rooms. For weeks after that afternoon, people told me they'd heard it, the song I played that morning, floating through the rain, curling down the street, finding ears it was never meant to find. Maybe they imagined it. Or maybe music just knows where to go when it's needed most. My daughter began visiting every Sunday now, always with muffins, always with news. She said, "Mom, the neighbors were talking about you at the market. They said they hadn't heard the piano in years." I laughed, silently, but she could see it. She brought a small notebook that said "Next Time" on the cover. She wrote in big letters, "Play for them someday." I added a shaky note beneath hers, "Soon." The someday came sooner than expected. The local community center called. Someone, I still don't know who, had told them about me. About the music teacher who lost her words, but not her rhythm. They were hosting a small recital for stroke recovery awareness. Would you be willing, they asked, to share a few notes? I looked at my hands, at the faint marks where life had written its lessons, and nodded. My daughter clapped her hands like a girl. Lily jumped and shouted, "Grandma's concert!" And my son, always the quiet one, just said, "It's time." The morning of the recital was the first truly clear day in weeks. The mountains peeked out like shy giants, and the air smelled of salt and pine. I wore the same soft gray dress I'd worn to Lily's first birthday, the one my husband used to call my moonlight dress. In the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman looking back, but her eyes were bright. Not perfect, just awake. The community hall was small, lit with 100 paper lanterns strung across the ceiling. People moved gently, as if the light itself might bruise. I could hear the murmur of voices, the shuffling of programs, the kind of excitement that hums low in the ribs. I sat at the old upright piano they'd rolled to the front. It wasn't mine, but the keys felt familiar, like distant cousins of my own. When the lights dimmed, I took one long breath. My fingers hovered, and the audience went still. If you're watching this, pause for just a second. Close your eyes. Listen to whatever sound is nearest to you. A clock, a car, the wind, your own breath. That's where music begins. I started with something simple, Clair de Lune, the piece I'd taught 100 times before. My right hand carried the melody, gentle as fog, and my left followed like a memory trying to keep up. Each note felt like stitching, sewing sound back into my story. People in the front row closed their eyes. A woman in a blue scarf began to cry quietly. The last chord lingered like a held hand. Then I paused, looked toward the back where my children sat, and nodded once. My daughter smiled. She knew. The wedding song. I began it the way I always had, hesitant, patient, like opening a room that still smells of someone you loved. The melody unfolded, warm, familiar, whole. Halfway through, I could feel it again, that ache that isn't pain, that pull of memory rising from bone and air. The piano seemed to breathe with me. The notes didn't come from my fingers anymore. They came from everywhere. In the second row, Lily whispered, "That's Grandpa's song." My daughter pulled her close, nodding with wet eyes. When I reached the last phrase, I slowed it down, each note a thank you, to the hands that remembered, to the family that waited, to the silence that healed. And when I lifted my hands from the keys, the room stayed perfectly still. Not applause yet, something better, reverence. Then the clapping began, soft, then louder, rising like a tide. I bowed, awkward but true. The sound felt like sunlight, and in that moment, I knew something I hadn't known before. I hadn't just recovered, I had returned. Afterward, people came to speak to me. They said things like, "You reminded me of my mother. My husband plays too. He'll start again. You gave me hope." Each word was a note, and together they made a song I never expected to hear. When I got home that evening, the sky was lavender, and the first stars had already come out to listen. I sat by the window with my tea. The piano stood across the room, bathed in amber light. I didn't need to play it tonight. It had already spoken for me. I watched my reflection in the glass. An old woman, a musician, a silence made whole again. Behind that reflection, I could see the faint outline of my husband's face, smiling the way he used to when I'd hit the right note after hours of trying. I whispered the only word my mouth managed perfectly now. "Thank you." And the wind outside carried it somewhere beyond hearing. If you've ever found your way back to yourself after forgetting the melody, write, "I'm still here" in the comments, because you are. And maybe someone reading it needs to remember that too. The house is quiet again tonight, but not empty. Each key holds a memory, each chord a promise. I think about how, in the end, it wasn't the therapy or the medicine or even time that gave me back my life. It was the music, the one language that never left. And maybe that's what we all are, unfinished songs waiting for the right hands to play us again. If you've listened this far, thank you for being here, because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end, one true story at a time.